into the Football Guys Fantasy Football Show. I'm Alfredo Brown, joined as always by Dave Kluge. Week 1 is almost in the books. We're recording this on Monday, September 9th, and we're talking about waivers. The Week 2 waiver wire adds to make. Dave, we're looking at 17 players here, and like we said, we're recording this prior to Monday Night Football, so something could happen there where you really want to go out and add one of those players off of that waiver, but
Like
we're looking
Corley,
at Thursday. Okay. Don't do that. Don't do that so early in the show. Don't just because if you name one player, that infers that someone else is going to get hurt or something's going to happen.
Or Malachi Corley is just going to be good enough that they can't ignore him. Just heard it here first if it happens. And if it doesn't, this was totally a joke.
This is a great way to start the show. I'm super excited. We're going strong. We're going strong. Dave, let's hop into these Week 2 waiver wire adds, and I'm going to read off the names that we've got here, okay? Starting in we're calling this Tier 3. These are the players that you can kind of just throw a couple bucks on in your free agent auction budget. At number 17 and 16, we've got Geno Smith and Baker Mayfield, 2 quarterbacks came out. They had some great weeks. There's some other guys we didn't put on here, like Derek Carr. I don't know that I want him going forward, but at least Geno and Baker, we've seen them do it on a weekly basis in years past. Colby Parkinson, tight end for the Los Angeles Rams. Andrei, not going to do it. I'm not going to do it because he even said it's a different way. He said it's Iosivas, which is like, now I'm totally thrown off. Just go get Andrei from Cincinnati. And then Emanuel Wilson, running back for the Green Bay Packers, and Alec Pierce, wide receiver for the Indianapolis Colts. Dave, who is the one player from this Tier 3 that you'd be willing to throw a couple bucks on because you really want to get him?
Probably Emanuel Wilson. You look at some of the quarterbacks here, Geno Smith, Baker Mayfield. You talked about Derek Carr as well. I see those guys as kind of streamers that you can stream on a weekly basis if they have a good matchup, but I don't think you're ever going to feel confident plugging those guys in as like a plug and play QB1 for the rest of the season. Colby Parkinson, he's got some short-term upside, but that's going to get limited when Puka Nacua returns and when Tyler Higbee returns. Iosivas, had a
whoa! Yeah. I said one, and now you're taking
why I'm not
single one
interested in these guys. The one guy who does jump out to me is Emanuel Wilson, and it's not that he's got a great profile or anything like that. We're talking about an undrafted guy here who is not the best athlete in the world. You start looking at some of his measurables and whatnot. There's nothing too exciting, but as we know, running backs, it's an opportunity game. It's a volume game, and right now, AJ Dillon is hurt, and there's going to be an opportunity here. There's no AJ Dillon. Marshawn Lloyd is dealing with an injury himself. Emmanuel Wilson is a clear RB2 right now, and in the limited touches that he did get in that game last week, he had 4 carries for 46 yards, and he looked good. He looked explosive. He was able to rip off some breakaway runs. So Emmanuel Wilson would be the one guy that I'd be interested in stashing here in deeper leagues. I'm not saying you need to run out and throw all of your fab on him, but throw 1-2% of your fab on Emmanuel Wilson. Keep him as a stash, and if Josh Jacobs goes down, then we're looking at a guy who is going to be the presumed RB1 in what is undoubtedly a very good Packers offense.
See, I differ there. I know you differ on one of the guys that I'm going to pick here, but I differ on Emanuel Wilson just because we do kind of have the ticking time bomb of Marshawn Lloyd coming back and the weird usage for Josh Jacobs. Like, I don't know how much that is going to matter. And then like the Malik Willis thing where he's coming in. I'm very worried about that Packers offense. I don't mind it, right? Like you're saying, just drop a couple bucks on the guy. So that's fine. I'm going to go with Colby Parkinson here, the tight end 7 from fantasy football this week for the Los Angeles Rams. He's available in 91% of leagues. And for me, Dave, I'm looking at it here. Colby Parkinson, 42 routes run on 51 passing plays, 51 dropbacks, and going out with 5 targets. He's right up there with Demarcus Robinson, Tyler Johnson. And I know that you're saying a lot of that is Puka Nacua being out. I mean, I think I would just argue that Tyler Johnson and Demarcus Robinson are the guys that get the benefit, and Cooper Kupp with his 21 targets. Those guys really benefited from Puka Nacua being out. I do see this is an offense that like they've used the tight end plenty of times in the past. This was something that we would always see with Tyler Higbee, which was why he was always kind of one of those guys we were willing to draft as the late round tight end. And I'm not saying Colby Parkinson is going to be a guy that you have to start every single week, but now that we've lost potentially Jake Ferguson and David Njoku for an unknown amount of time, there are going to be some holes at tight end for various teams. And I'm fine dropping $4 or $5 on a Colby Parkinson, who could be in that tight end 12 to 15 range each week. And especially if I had Njoku or Ferguson, I'm willing to take them. That Rams offense still looks good going up against the tough Detroit Lions defense. So I'm there with Colby Parkinson. Dave, let's move on to tier number 2 here, where these are the guys that we're willing to drop a little bit more money on. So let's start with Ray Davis, running back for the Buffalo Bills. He didn't get a lot of touches, but with the touches he did get, he looked very, very good. He was getting passing down work. And then the other running back who was involved, Ty Johnson, who was getting passing down work, has actually come down with an injury. So we might not be seeing him next week or for an extended period of time. This opens the door for Ray Davis. Dave, how did you feel watching Ray Davis in week 1?
Yeah, I mean, it's as simple as that. He only had 3 carries and a target, but he looked very, very good. And, for a rookie to get touches in week 1 shows that the team is pretty confident in him. We just saw Jalen Wright and Blake Corum and these other guys that we were kind of excited about in the offseason, either being healthy scratches or just not getting any snaps at all in their first game. Meanwhile, the Bills were confident enough to just throw Ray Davis out there, give him some opportunities, and he looked really good when he got the ball in his hands. So, again, not a guy that you're going to pick up and immediately plug into your week 2 lineup by any means, but a guy who could carve out a larger and larger role on every week and has that contingent upside. So really, really like Ray Davis as a pickup. I would have recommended drafting him, but if he's still available on your waiver wire, yeah, throw 5-8% of your fab down, and you're sitting on a potential guy who's an injury away from a big workload on a good offense.
Yeah, Ray Davis, 4 opportunities on 6 snaps. So
Yeah.
basically, when he was on the field, he was getting used and he looked good. And this is how the door opens for a player like this, a young player. This is a guy we wanted you to draft in the last rounds of your fantasy drafts. And if he's still there on waivers, go after him. Next player we have on here, Jaleel McLaughlin, running back for the Denver Broncos, who this was such an interesting twist on whatever the Broncos are doing at running back. I do think that we don't have to panic yet about Javonte Williams, but it was odd to see that Jaleel McLaughlin was the rundown back and Javonte Williams was used more on passing downs. This was just a really odd setup. The offense did not look good. Bo Nix is going to have his growing pains. Dave, talk to us about Jaleel McLaughlin.
Well, first of all, this Broncos team is going to be terrible. Bo Nix looked
I was
awful.
being nice.
There was like nothing really good. There was I watched the game and I was trying to find like a silver lining, and there wasn't one. Like I talked about Cortland Sutton in last week's show, saying like he could be that Michael Thomas slash Marquez Colston type of role in this Sean Payton offense, and he was. He drew 12 targets, but 8 of them were terrible, and all of them were very short, and it didn't turn into much fantasy production at all. But this game, if you watch this game, I think that, Jaleel McLaughlin outtouched Javonte Williams, and that surprises a lot of people, 15-9 in favor of Jaleel McLaughlin. And I think a lot of people could say, well, that was game script dependent. They were trailing for the majority of the game, and that's when they wanted to bring Jaleel McLaughlin in. But I think the Broncos are going to be trailing in a lot of games. And if you want the guy who's going to be playing in, negative game scripts when they're playing from behind, that's where we saw Jaleel McLaughlin getting the majority of his touches. So absolutely worth a pickup here. This is kind of disappointing for those of us that expected Javonte Williams to be in a workhorse role. It seems like for whatever reason, his role was reeled back from what it was last year. So I think this is just going to be a headache. This is kind of how Sean Payton deploys his backfields. We're going to see some games where it's going to be Javonte, some games where it's going to be Jaleel, and it's going to be tough to predict. But I think this could be kind of similar to like the Najee Harris, Jalen Warren situation last year, where you can just start these guys on any given weeks, and you'll take the highs with the highs, and you'll take the lows with the lows. But I think Jaleel McLaughlin is going to be plenty involved for the rest of the season.
Yeah, I think McLaughlin stays involved. I don't know that like I said, I'm not ready to panic on Javonte Williams just yet. We may just have to panic on this entire Broncos offense, which is a totally different story. So I guess I'm kind of eating my words there, but I think it's just important for us not to overreact too much in week 1. There are going to be players that we can go out and drop our fab on, and we're going to talk about those guys in tier 1. Next guy I want to talk about here is Demarcus Robinson, wide receiver for the Los Angeles Rams, who is available in 88% of leagues. And Dave, this one was not only a guy that we were saying to draft late because he already had some value as the team's third receiver, but now with a potential injury that could be We don't know yet. The reports have not come out yet. What's going on with Puka Nacua? I've seen a lot of the medical experts within the fantasy industry say that it does seem like it could be a re-aggravation of the same knee versus sack issue that he was having earlier in the offseason, which could be anywhere from 1 to 4 weeks of Puka Nacua missing time. So Demarcus Robinson becomes a guy who could be pretty valuable once again in a good Rams offense, just like I talked about with Colby Parkinson. Demarcus Robinson was out there for 72 of the team's 78 snaps, 47 routes run, 7 targets. He looked good. He looked good. He looked valuable. And I think he's a guy that you can actually plug in when you need to in 3 wide receiver leagues. If you have 3 wide receivers and multiple flexes, this is a guy who I think gives you some decent wide receiver 4 to 3 value on a weekly basis.
Yeah, we saw over the final month of 2023, he was giving us top 12 production. And we know that this team runs a lot of three wide receiver sets. Their base personnel is 11 personnel. And that's what we're going to see is Demarcus Robinson isn't going to be coming off the field all that much. Cooper Cup is a mainstay. When Puka Nacua is healthy, he's a mainstay. And I think that Demarcus Robinson is the mainstay as a wide receiver 3. Now that Puka Nacua is injured, we see Demarcus Robinson on the field for almost every single snap. And then they're kind of rotating through their wide receiver 3 kind of by a committee where we're seeing a few different guys play there. But Demarcus Robinson is a full time player in this offense, and I think it's as simple as that. You want a guy, you want guys on your team that are on good offenses, full time players, running a lot of routes, drawing a lot of targets. Demarcus Robinson is going to continue to do that. Now, I think that his upside could be limited if and when Puka Nacua returns, but if Nacua is out, we're probably looking at Demarcus Robinson as a weekly top 30 receiver.
Yeah. Yeah. It's one of those things where I'm okay just getting good pieces of good offenses, and that's fine. We've seen Robinson produce before. Next guy on here, Greg Dortch, wide receiver for the Arizona Cardinals. Get Dorched. This was great. This was great. It's so funny that we've been sitting here all off season, getting excited about Marvin Harrison Jr. and Trey McBride and everything that could happen for the Arizona Cardinals offense, and then yeah, of course, week one, Greg Dortch goes out there and gets the highest target per route run rate of any pass catcher on the Cardinals, leads the Cardinals in targets. Dave, is this a 1 week thing, or can we expect Greg Dortch to remain a big part of this Cardinals offense going forward?
No, Greg Dortch is, I think he's here to stay. And this is something that I talked about a ton this offseason. I was a big fan of Greg Dortch and we'd make the jokes about the name and the nicknames and all that sort of stuff. But he was pretty dominant yesterday. And Marvin Harrison, I think that he's going to see his role grow as the season progresses. But I was looking yesterday, right after the early slate of games, week one target per route run leaders through that early slate. Rashi Rice, Isaiah Likely, Michael Pittman, Pickens, Tyreek Hill, Keenan Allen, Wan'Dale Robinson, a lot of names that you'd expect there. And then Greg Dortch sitting at 28% targets per route run. That is a fantastic rate to be drawing targets. I mean, he was essentially operating as the team's wide receiver 1 yesterday. He was tied with Trey McBride for the second most opportunities on the team behind only James Conner. He's a good guy. He's a good guy. He's a good player. We know that. Kyler Murray raved about him this offseason, and I don't think anybody should really be surprised by this usage. Probably looking at Dortch for the rest of the season as a flex player. Last year, I looked, he played just about 23% of his snaps from the slot. Yesterday, he played almost 78% of his snaps from the slot. So we're seeing a very different change in usage, and that's kind of been the theme of week one is that teams are putting their most talented player in the slot so they can get them more opportunities, and that's what we're seeing for Greg Dortch.
Next guy on here at number 7, we've got Justice Hill, running back for the Baltimore Ravens, and I'm not as high on Justice Hill as you are, Dave. I think it's only just like a few spots when we were ranking our waiver wire guys here. But my thing with the Ravens is I don't know that we got the clear picture of what they're going to be. I don't think that we're going to be seeing the Ravens play the Chiefs or the Chiefs level caliber team every single week where they're going to be trailing and put themselves in so many more passing downs that we usually see. And it was very odd. I don't think we've ever seen this. And you know what? Kudos to you. You said Justice Hill is going to be involved. I'm still being a little stubborn and saying I think it's a week one thing that he was this involved. I think the usage could flip flop a bit more here, but Justice Hill 43 snaps, Derrick Henry 37 snaps. Justice Hill went out and ran 28 routes, 6 targets, only 1 carry. So it seems like he is the pure passing down back for the Baltimore Ravens, but it yielded some fantasy fruit, so to speak, here. And I wonder how that role
I was seeing 8
continues going
targets,
forward.
just I don't know, I think it was 6
Well,
receptions, you might have misspoke.
PFF, no. PFF removes targets that are uncatchable. So that's why with 6 targets over 8.
Gotcha. All right. Well, I saw 8 targets, and that's exciting. I mean,
Well, I
that's
saw
a just an
6, so you're wrong.
that's an unbelievable, and yeah, I will pat myself on the back a little bit because this is something I talked about with the Ravens offense. I think that you are being a little trepidatious, and I totally understand why. But we kind of saw this start to take form before Mark Andrews got hurt yesterday, where they started deploying a lot more 12 personnel, and we'll talk about that with Isaiah Likely a little bit, but. I had some concerns about Derrick Henry getting up there in age and the downtrending efficiency, and I think it's too early to put the nail in Derrick Henry's coffin, but my goodness, he looked terrible. He was able to salvage his day with the touchdown, and that was kind of the thesis with Derrick Henry is drafting this guy in round 2, and he can have 20 plus touchdowns, but better hope that he can do it because he does not seem to have that burst. He didn't really have the opportunities to get the long speed. It could just be kind of learning the tendencies of the new offensive line, and maybe we see this get better as the season progresses. But right now, Justice Hill just looks like he's got more juice, and if he's going to be the passing down back, he's going to see plenty of targets, and that's going to raise his weekly ceiling. So, Harbaugh told us this offseason, he said, we view Justice Hill as the lead back. And I think everybody just scoffed at it because they want to get Derrick Henry. And the idea of how high Derrick Henry's ceiling could be in this offense was so alluring. But Harbaugh told us that Justice Hill was going to be involved. And he does a lot of things really well where he can stretch defenses horizontally when he gets out in the flat. So I'm sipping the Kool-Aid here. I think that Justice Hill is going to be here to stay. I'm looking at him as a, just plug and play flex play going forward until we have reason to believe that he shouldn't be. So, yeah, he's a guy that I'd comfortably spend like 10 to 15% of my fab on this week.
I'm willing to wait this out a bit longer. I think the Ravens looked pretty bad overall. This was not like this team just did not look like they were in sync, and this is a lot of what we saw last year, especially at the beginning of the year. And we kind of wrote it off as, oh, it's the Todd Monken offense. I don't know if they are out of sync because of new players or because of how bad that offensive line looks. Like that could be the other thing here. The Ravens offensive line did lose some players and they are struggling. Daniel Faalele looked really, really bad on the right side of that offensive line. But I don't know that I look at this Ravens team and say this is a team that's going to commit to passing the balls to the running back a lot. This is just not something that Lamar has ever done or that the Ravens have ever done. Uh, it's hard for me to say Justice Hill is the lead guy when he gets one carry. So I think that yes, there's going to be absolutely some PPR value for Justice Hill. I'm not quite ready, and it doesn't sound like you are either to write off Derrick Henry just yet.
Yeah, I
Let's
mean,
go.
as much as I'd love to, because that's what I said in the
You'd love to
offseason.
write him off.
Yeah, I mean,
Rephrase that. Rephrase that.
no, I would because I drafted very little of Derrick Henry this year. I thought that he was one of the most
That's
mispriced players.
selfish and rude. Selfish and rude.
Yeah, well, I like winning money, and if Derrick Henry has a bad season, I'm going to win a lot of money this year because I wasn't drafting Derrick Henry. We saw the downtrending efficiency, and I think that a lot of what we saw was the game plan. Their offensive line lost some players, and they don't have a great offensive line in Baltimore, and we know Spagnuolo is going to have a very blitz heavy approach. So I think that that was kind of the game plan. Like, let's just get Isaiah Likely out on these little 5-yard out routes, and let's get Justice Hill going in the passing game. But if they have a bad offensive line, they're going to have to do that multiple times this season, anytime they
Yeah.
face anybody who's going to be blitzing. So I think this is going to be, I don't want to say predictable, but I think that anytime we see the Ravens going into a game where they're going to be facing a blitz heavy opponent, I think that their game plan is going to be to get the ball in Isaiah Likely and Justice Hill's hands. So might be overreading into 1 week, but I think that we kind of have a picture of what the Ravens want to do going forward this year.
I do think that's it right there. I do think you said it. I think this is going to be one of those things where if we have an opponent for Baltimore where it's going to be a tight game, it could be a blitz heavy defense, could be a lot of passing back and forth like it was with the Chiefs, and the Ravens can't quite control the clock, then yeah, we're going to see something a little different. Let's go to the next player here. At number 6, we've got Wan'Dale Robinson. That's a name I haven't heard in a long, long time. He's available in 81% of leagues. Next week, the New York Giants go up against the Washington Commanders, who just got absolutely fleeced through the air by Baker Mayfield and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers receivers. Chris Godwin out of the slot, absolutely crushed. Guess
Mhm.
where Wandale Robinson plays, boys and girls? In the slot. Wandale Robinson. Dave, am I correct? 12 targets in week 1?
Yep. Second most behind
Absolutely,
only Cooper Cup.
absolutely nuts. I mean, we've seen this before, though. We have seen where Wandale Robinson is a favorite target of Daniel Jones, but I think it's that last part of the sentence that's the problem. Favorite target of Daniel Jones. How much value do we give this? Because we were talking about this with Malik Neighbors, is that, yeah, these guys could get 8, 10, 12 targets. How valuable are those targets in a Daniel Jones led offense? That's what worries me.
Well, see, what I like about Wan'Dale Robinson is he's not a guy who needs to get deep downfield. Like he is just going to be running underneath routes. You look at his A dot historically since he's been into the league, and we're looking at rookie season was the highest A dot he ever had at 6.2 yards. Yesterday was just 5.1 yards. So it's not like this guy's running these super deep routes downfield. What he does best is after the catch. Like if you watched him in Kentucky, he's like a running back when he gets the ball in his hands. And that's what they're
Yeah.
going to do is feed him on these short little crossers and let him make plays after the catch. So prior to his ACL injury in his rookie year, he had some mind-blowing usage. You were looking at his target per routes run, and he was leading the league in some weeks. And now he's picking up right where he left off with 30% of his routes he's getting targeted on, which is truly elite, like up there with Tyreek Hill and CeeDee Lamb and some of the best of the best. So yeah, it's scary because these targets are coming from Daniel Jones, but I think the fact that there's such easy passes that he's just kind of that dump off option, 3, 4, 5 yards off the line of scrimmage, and then he can make plays after the catch. I'm buying into it. I mean, the only real knock that we've had with Wandale Robinson through this point in his career has been his health. When he was a rookie, it took him a few weeks to get up to speed, and then when he did, he was dominant, and then he got hurt, and then in year two, he was still kind of recovering from that injury. He seems to be healthy now. He's still commanding the targets. He's got the juice to make plays after the catch. So, Wandale Robinson, that's why I'm a little bit higher on him. I'm willing to push him up a little bit. Can't ignore 12 targets, and now being farther removed from the ACL injury. Wan'Dale Robinson is, I've said this about a few guys we've talked about, somebody that you can probably plug in as a flex until we have reason not to.
I might just poop in your Cheerios here. You said we can't ignore 12 targets, but I think you can ignore targets when they're coming from Daniel Jones on this Giants offense. We 12 targets made Wandale Robinson the wide receiver 31 this week. I, I'm not saying that you don't need him on your team because that is wide receiver 3 production. It just worries me that that's what 12 targets yields. I don't know that I want to invest even my fab into this offense. Remember, like I was the one who was saying like I don't want to draft Malik Neighbors either. Now I could end up having egg all over my face on that one, but I don't know how much longer. Like this offense just feels like it is ready to implode. This team feels like it's ready to implode. It was not a good game call from Brian Daboll there, but I mean, what you're saying has merit. That these are easy targets for Wandale Robinson. He's a player that can make plays once he gets the ball in his hands, but ooh, I struggle saying, okay, do I want to go and grab Wandale Robinson, who's probably going to end up being my fantasy wide receiver 4 or 5, and spend $5 to $10 of fab on that, or would I rather go and get an upside running back like a Ray Davis or Jaleel McLaughlin, or for me, my preference is like I still like Colby Parkinson at tight end. Maybe I'm just being a little crazy there,
Yeah,
but
I think
um,
in week one specifically though, like we just have to look at the usage. Looking at fantasy points, it just doesn't tell the full story. Like, yeah,
oh,
he
I
was the
get
wide
that.
receiver 31, but if he falls into the end zone, which he might not be able to do too often in this
You
Giants
got to get
offense.
close to the end zone for
Yeah,
that.
but if he falls into the end zone, he's given us more points this week than Rashi Rice and Jalen Waddle, and he's up there with Nico Collins. So I think that that's the thing. You kind of
Yeah,
look at the routes run, you look at the targets that he's drawing, you look at the usage, which Wan'Dale Robinson has checked all of those boxes with flying colors. So I think that you can chase the usage here. And like I said, he's a touchdown away. He breaks one tackle and scores a touchdown and pads an extra 20 yards into his, and then all of a sudden he's a top 10 wide receiver this week. So we know the athleticism is there, the usage is there. I'm okay eating the cheese on Wan'Dale Robinson, just a guy that I've really liked since his time in Kentucky.
if ifs and buts were candies and nuts, Wandale Robinson would be a top 12 wide receiver. All right, let's go to tier number 1. We're getting to our top 5 waiver wire ads. These are the priority guys that we are telling you to spend anywhere from 10 to 30% of your free agent auction budget on. Dave, let's start at number 5 with Bucky Irving, running back for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and he is available in 75% of leagues. I personally did not think that we'd be talking too much about Bucky Irving, but here we are. He got some pretty good usage in week 1. It wasn't just in the passing game. He looked explosive. And I mean, cat's out of the bottle, genie's out of the bag. He's a good player. He's going to get usage now. I think that it's not just a player that has contingent upside if Rashad White misses time, but he's a guy that could be in that running back 3 range from a week to week basis, depending on the matchup.
Yeah, we talked about this a lot this offseason that I was out on Rashad White because you looked last year, he was dead last in rushing EPA among all running backs. And yesterday, his EPA was terrible. He was second worst in the league in rushing yards over expectation. He's still the same inefficient runner that he was last year. Last year, there was just no competition in the backfield. So he maintained this stranglehold on the weighted opportunities. And now here we are going into a new year where he has added competition and he is getting handily outplayed by this new competition. I mean, Bucky Irving had twice as many rushing yards on 9 attempts compared to Rashad White's 15. Like he was averaging almost 4 times as many yards per attempt yesterday, pulled 3 targets as well in the passing game, and he just, you look at the eye test between Rashad White and Bucky Irving, and it's not close. I mean, Bucky Irving just looks like such a better running back right now. So Rashad White does have some insulated value here. You know, he's got draft capital. He's been with the team for a couple of years. I don't think that his role is just going to vanish into thin air, but it's impossible to ignore just how good Bucky Irving looked. And we got to remember that Bucky Irving, a lot of people were talking about him as like the running back 2, running back 3 in this draft class. And then he bombed the combine, and that's kind of what caused him to fall a little bit. But you watch his film in college, Bucky Irving is a very good running back. And had it not been for a bad combine day, he'd probably have been drafted much higher than he actually was. So this guy with a ton of talent who looked really good in week one, it would be foolish to ignore.
Really similar to Kyron Williams, who was mostly a pass catching running back coming out of Notre Dame, who
Mhm.
was smaller guy, bombed the combine, got drafted late, and we saw him as a contingency back, and eventually it turned into something. So Bucky Irving, I'm not trying to make that connection entirely, but I'm saying he could end up being one of those guys that we just overlook because of the size, the
Yep.
measurables, the speed, all that stuff. And I mean, speaking of Kyron Williams, the Rams played the Lions last night. That's who the Tampa Bay Buccaneers play next week. So the Detroit Lions were really, really good against the run last night. I also know a
Mhm.
lot of that is just the Rams offensive line just was decimated. They were just getting shredded to bits, like losing one player after another. Kyron Williams under 3 yards per attempt last night. So I would not be surprised if we get a Rashad White poor performance, struggling on the ground against the Detroit Lions, and then the Buccaneers need to find ways to deploy Bucky Irving and get him out there to make some explosive plays for them. So would not surprise me one bit. Let's go to number 4 here. This guy used to be kind of be like the butt of a joke. And then as the offseason went on, we were listening to the reports. And before week 1, we labeled Tank Bigsby as a last minute waiver wire pickup. Go and get him before the season starts. And by George, Dave, by Dave, by George, by whoever, Tank Bigsby got a lot of usage, a lot more than I don't think anyone, even Tank Bigsby, would have predicted that much usage. I wonder how much game script was involved there with the Miami game, but holy smokes, Tank Bigsby was getting a lot of the early down work,
Mhm.
and it's seems like he's getting some pretty valuable touches. Not enough of the passing work though,
So I expected Tank Bigsby to be involved, and yeah, that's why we talked about it last week. But I was expecting like
but not like this. Yeah,
30% of the touches. He came out and had just as many carries yesterday as Travis Etienne did, and he had more yards after contact. He had a better PFF rushing grade. He had more rushing yards over expectation, and he just looked like the all-around better back. And we got to remember last year that Tank Bigsby was involved in Week 1 as well. And Alfredo, do you remember what happened in Week 1 of 2023 in the Jacksonville backfield?
I don't
Um,
remember what happened last week.
Tank Bigsby had a fumble at the goal line
Mm,
and then essentially lost
uh-oh,
his role for the remainder of the season, ended up in Doug Peterson's
uh-oh.
doghouse. Did you see what Travis Etienne did yesterday at the
I
1 yard
did,
line?
I
Now, I'm not
did.
saying that, Travis Etienne is getting big speed and he's going to spend the rest of the season in Doug Peterson's doghouse, but that was kind of the reason that Tank Bigsby lost his role last year was because of ball security issues. Now, Travis Etienne coughing up game deciding fumbles in the final seconds at the goal line. I mean, Definitely something to keep an eye on. And Tank Bigsby is a guy who is a priority waiver ad if he's not already rostered in your league, because this could end up just being a 50-50 split. And yesterday, Tank Bigsby looked like the better running back. We've also got the contingent upside, of course, like we talk about with all of these running back dues, where if Travis Etienne goes down, then we're looking at Bigsby as probably a top 10, top 15 running back going forward. But even with Etienne in the picture, we might see Bigsby just carve out a larger and larger role because he looked really, really good yesterday.
Let's go to our next player on here. Number 3, Isaiah Likely, tight end for the Baltimore Ravens. And Dave, this is an interesting one because we've already I think we've kind of beat this to death here that we don't know that the Ravens are going to have the same type of game strip that they did last game. I don't know that we're going to be seeing Mark Andrews get double teamed by teams as often as he was. The Isaiah Likely thing likely does not happen again. 12 targets in week 1 just seems kind of nuts, and he was a toenail away from having 2 touchdowns. This would have been an insane game. He's still the tight end 1 in fantasy right now, but with the injuries to other tight ends like David Njoku, like Jake Ferguson, and then just basically seeing that tight end is a wasteland once again after week 1, how valuable does Isaiah Likely become on the waiver wire?
I think this is somewhere where you and I are going to disagree a little bit, because I think that Isaiah Likely is the truth. Like, I think that he's here to stay, and I think that he is somebody that you should splash some money on, especially with David Njoku going down and Ferguson going down and so many of these other late round tight ends that we had expected things from not really panning out in week 1. I talked about it with Jeff Bell when we did our divisional breakdown series, and I mentioned it a few times throughout the offseason on this show, but Todd Monken at Georgia ran a 2 tight end base personnel, and that's exactly what we saw from the Ravens on, what was it, Thursday night they played, right? Yeah, Thursday night. And that's something that I had said that like I hoped would translate into 2024. I used the cat's out of the bag term multiple times when talking about Isaiah Likely. I said he showed how good he was at the end of 2023. They're not just going to shelf that. And sure enough, this year they started just running 12 personnel as their base set. And it wasn't Mark Andrews that was necessarily the guy who was getting hurt here. If you look at the production only, sure, Mark Andrews was the guy who was kind of let out, but it was Nelson Aguilar was the guy last year who was almost a full-time player in this offense. And by switching from 11 personnel to 12 personnel, Nelson Aguilar goes to the sidelines and they're able to get Isaiah Likely out on the field. So I don't think that we're going to see Isaiah Likely pulling 12 targets a week. I don't think that we're going to see Mark Andrews getting bracketed on almost every single play and unable to perform. But I think that Isaiah Likely is going to maintain his role as a full-time player in this offense. So I'm not panicking about Mark Andrews. And if you want actionable advice on Mark Andrews, I'd say go out and buy low, because he still had more snaps and ran more routes than Isaiah Likely did. It was just a really tough matchup. So I'm buying low on Mark Andrews, but I see a world where Mark Andrews can still be a top 5 tight end. Isaiah Likely could be inside the top 12. So I'm sipping the Kool-Aid here, because I think that we're just going to see Isaiah Likely effectively as the team's wide receiver 3 behind Zay Flowers and Mark Andrews.
You started this by saying that you were disagreeing. What? I've never said that Isaiah Likely is just going to disappear. I'm saying he's likely not getting 12 targets again, and Mark Andrews isn't getting bracketed. Same thing that you just said.
Yeah,
I
I think he's a priority ad, and I think that's the difference. Is
I put him as the number 3 ad. So did you. What are you talking about? You're just
I don't know.
manufacturing fights for content, David.
I don't have to manufacture them. I could pull up the rankings. I mean, it's just I
What
thought that
rankings?
I didn't know that you were high on Isaiah Likely, so I apologize about that. I'm sorry.
Well,
I
I mean, I
misread the
wasn't. Are you
situation.
talking about pre-draft rankings? Is that where you're saying we disagreed?
Yeah, I mean, if you've
Or
turned a leaf and
no? I
you
mean,
are
that's
in on Isaiah Likely, I'm all here for it, Alfredo.
I mean, he was like tight end 19 or 20 for me. Like I'm not saying that changed, but I'm saying in terms of waiver wire priority ad, sure. Like we're not disagreeing here. I think he is a top 3 waiver wire ad, especially with the tight end injuries, especially with the way this offense is going. I think you said it perfectly. He is going to be the number 3 target on this
Yeah.
team. I do think Mark Andrews remains the top target on this team. The Zay Flowers usage is confusing and weird. And mom, pick me up. I'm scared. I don't know what's going on. But Isaiah Likely, it's the same thing that we've said is just once a player plays this well and shows this level of athleticism and becomes a go-to target for a top tier quarterback, especially in the time where they need him most towards the
Mhm.
end of the game, they were going to Isaiah Likely. So yeah, I think he is a must add if you have a tight end issue. I'd be willing to throw 15 to 20% of my free agent auction budget on him. If you miss out on him, I'll just keep throwing the name Colby Parkinson out there just because it's fun to say.
Yeah, and I'd say if you've got like I'm not if I've got some of the elite guys, like I'm not panicking about Dalton Kincaid yet. I'm not panicking about
No.
Mark Andrews or Travis Kelsey. I'm less likely to spend a bunch of money
Hey,
on Isaiah Likely if I have one of those guys that's like a top
right.
5 tight end. But yeah, if I've got Njoku or Ferguson, or if I just completely punted tight end and I was just hoping for a guy to pop up, he's here. Like, you don't have to wait any longer. Like, we've already got this year's elite tight end popping up on the waiver wire. So, yeah, I think it's very contextual. Like, if you've got a good tight end, yeah, I'll throw a few bucks and unlikely, and maybe pick him up as a tight end too, and have that insurance. But if I don't have a tight end that I'm confident in, I don't think it's crazy to think about dropping like 30-40% of your fab on Isaiah Likely, because you're
Woo!
likely getting a top 10 tight end that you can just plug in, week out, and not have to think twice about.
I do think there's something to be said about that. And you might be right. You might be right on that about how much the drop, because when you do go and you add a player that can be a weekly starter for you this early in the season, I mean, the value on that is you're getting a season long starter that you didn't have to waste a high draft pick on. And if he is going to finish top 10, top 12 at a position that traditionally is just a crapshoot,
And
then
it
yeah,
is again this year, it appears.
yeah, yeah. I mean, like 30, it might sound crazy coming out of our mouths as we say it, but 30% of your fab isn't that crazy when you end up with a player that can produce. And this was happening last year when we're talking about Puka Nakua and Kyron Williams and saying, well, the targets might not be there next week. It's just maybe we learn our lesson. Follow the targets for good players and good offenses and get that value as early as you can.
Yeah, this is a 6'5" guy with, elite burst, who's a polished route runner and has good hands. Like, and that was kind of the thesis this offseason, is like, what if Isaiah Likely becomes a full-time player on this offense? Then he could be really, really good. And that was the only trepidation that we had about Isaiah Likely, is how much is he going to play? Well, we saw it. He's going to play almost every single snap. So let's not overthink this.
Yeah, I think the question there too was how much are the Ravens going to pass with
Mhm.
Derrick Henry on the team? Thought it would be a little bit more run heavy. Um, the Ravens just remain a little bit clouded, but it's
And
still a
this
good
is
offense.
this is the Munkin offense that we had hoped to see. Like, I talked about it a lot over the second half of the season last year. Lamar Jackson was pacing for 4,000 passing yards and 1,000 rushing yards. And from week one, if we want to extrapolate that week out right there, it's pacing for 4,700 passing yards and 2,000 rushing yards. Now, obviously, that's going to regress a little bit, but this is a team that's going to run a ton of plays. They're going to be very efficient. And I want to be in on this Ravens offense. And if I missed out on drafting Mark Andrews and I missed out on drafting Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson, now I've got a chance to get in. And my entry point into this offense is picking up Justice Hill and Isaiah Likely off of waivers. And now all of a sudden you've got full-time players on what we know is going to be a good offense.
Let's go to our number two player. And these final two players we have here, they are not as readily available as some of the other waiver wire targets we've talked about. These guys are available in less than 50% of leagues, but nearly half of you can go and pick up Zach Charbonnet off of waivers. Next week, the Seattle Seahawks play the New England Patriots. Zach Charbonnet, listen, let's not get carried away. He did not have a huge role for the Seattle Seahawks in week one. This was Kenneth Walker's backfield, and Zach Charbonnet seems like the clear handcuff. It's not even a guy that's like working the passing downs, because Ken Walker did work plenty of the passing downs. It was almost an even split on passing downs. But just like last year, Ken Walker had an abdominal injury, and looks like
Mhm.
that's something that might be creeping up again. So it is something to monitor. By the time this episode comes out, the news may have changed, right? He could be perfectly fine to go for week two, or he could be missing week two. We have no idea. But this is one of those players that honestly shouldn't be on your waiver wire regardless. We saw how much the Seahawks are willing to commit to a running back and commit to the run overall. Now, a lot of that is just Kenneth Walker's the phenomenal running back who can make, chicken salad out of chicken, what. But Zach Charbonnet is a guy based on the contingency upside, based on the Seattle usage for the running backs. And I mean, we also saw him catch a touchdown. We do know that's
Yeah.
in his bag of tricks. This is a guy that I think should not be on your waiver wire, and you should be spending some free agent auction budget on him.
Yeah, I've said a lot that Zach Charbonnet, my kind of loose comp for him is Leonard Fournette. He's this like big, bulky, burly guy, and you just expect him to just be like a hammer in between the tackles. And then you see him run a route, and you're like, wow, he's got kind of quick feet. And then you see him catch a pass, and you're like, wait, he's got soft hands too. Like, what is this? And it's kind of weird. Like, you don't expect to see Charbonnet do the things that he can do in the passing game. But I think that you hit it on the head. I mean, I tweeted out yesterday, like minutes before the touchdown, that Walker was just crushing Charbonnet in opportunities and snaps. He was outsnapping him 28-6. He had 19 opportunities to Charbonnet's 4. But this injury is the same injury that caused Kenneth Walker to miss 2 games last year. So maybe he misses a game, maybe he misses 2, maybe he misses 4, maybe he misses none. We don't know. But Zach Charbonnet is must draft, might be one of the most elite handcuffs in fantasy football. We saw him get 3 starts last year, and they were against pretty tough opponents. If you recall, he had to play against the Rams, the 49ers, and forget the other team. I think it was the Rams twice. The Rams twice in the 49ers,
Mhm.
if I recall. Whatever it was. He had tough matchups last year and didn't look great, but the schedule going forward isn't going to be quite as tough for him. So yeah, Charbonnet must draft in my opinion, or must
It's
pick up in my opinion.
it's a little up and down. It's a little up and down for the Seahawks. They've got the Patriots next week, who could slow things down. Miami in week 3, where if Walker's healthy, it's going to be a heavily featured passing game
Right.
for him.
Lions are going to be
Week
tough, but then
week 4
Giants.
in the
Ooh,
Lions.
if
Yeah,
he's
you
starting
get
week
a
5 against the Giants, oh boy, oh boy.
yeah. I mean, I can see someone commenting right now, like, how are you going to justify picking up Zach Charbonnet for a week 5 Giants game? And it's
But I
just
mean,
like,
next week
guys,
against the
we're
Patriots, he could
right. Like
have 30 points.
we're not justifying picking him up based on the usage here in week 2. Like, I will remain like one of the biggest Ken Walker fans. Just love everything he does in the field. This is if Ken Walker is injured and you have issues at running back, or even if you have Ken Walker on your team, or you had an injury to a different running back on your team. Zach Charbonnet is a good contingency guy to pick up and have on your bench. All right, let's go to our number 1 waiver wire pickup. He is available in 42% of leagues, and well, by golly, I figure you guys have all been able to predict who it is. La Vuelta. JK Dobbins is here for the return. He tweeted that out yesterday, Dave. You know what La Vuelta means in Spanish?
I don't.
The return.
Oh,
He is excited. He is pumped to be back. He did not get a like ridiculous amount of work, but those 10 carries, he made some big
13 and a
plays.
half yards per carry.
I mean, sheesh, he doesn't quite have the long speed like he used to, and like you mentioned to me before the show, a lot of that is the conditioning, guys coming off of injuries,
We
and
did that with Brees Hall week 1 last year, where he was out in the open field and then just got gassed. And I think that's common when guys are coming back from injury. So I'm not overly concerned about the lack of long speed.
yeah. Well, what I was happy about was the actual usage in the passing game here too. Like, I know there was a split. Gus Edwards had 11 carries, J.K. Dobbins had 10, but J.K. Dobbins looked so much better than Gus. And so I expect that number to increase for J.K. Dobbins. But the usage in the passing game, 3 targets. Remember, Justin Herbert is a guy who, for the longest time, all he wanted to do was target Austin Eckler. How much of that was offensive coordinator? How much of that was Justin Herbert? Well, even when they've changed offensive coordinators, Herbert has still targeted the running back. And they don't necessarily have a great receiving core. If J.K. Dobbins is looking at an increased role on a run heavy offense with a quarterback that likes to check down, Dave, this is one of those guys I'm willing to spend 30% of my fab, maybe even more, depending on what's going on with my running back situation. But like you've said, if you can get a guy who is a starter,
Mhm.
not just for his team, but for your fantasy team in week 1, have him for the rest of the year. This is a zero RB drafter's dream to be able to add J.K. Dobbins after a big week 1 performance.
Yeah, and I think like if for some reason he's available in, like a 12 team league with like more than 5 bench spots, if somehow he slipped out of the draft or was dropped before week 1 or something like that, I don't think it's crazy to say you drop 50+% of your fab on a guy like this, because we know that like health has been the issue so far for J.K. Dobbins. But you look at Gus Edwards and Kamani Vidal and J.K. Dobbins, and J.K. Dobbins is by far the best running back in the room. Whether you want to look at pedigree, athleticism, college production, what he's done in the NFL, you name it, like J.K. Dobbins is clearly the best of the best. And I overlooked Dobbins a lot this offseason because of the injury history. I was the guy every year drafting J.K. Dobbins. He was my RB2 in this class behind Jonathan Taylor, was a huge fan of him, had been buying the injury dip year after year after year. And this was the one year where I just said, you know what, I'm rooting for JK Dobbins. I'm a fan, but I can't do it to myself again. Like I can't be hurt by JK Dobbins again. And he was a guy that I passed up on in a lot of drafts. And I wasn't recommending drafting because of the injury history, but he's still got the burst. He's still got the strength. The long speed is going to come as he gets more conditioned in the NFL season. So yeah, if it's a 10 team league with short benches, 20-30% of your fab, if it's a 12 team with deep benches and he's somehow available out there, 50-60%, I don't think it's that crazy to think about dropping on Dobbins.
Yeah, there are things that just don't get taken away despite knee and Achilles injuries, and that's vision, and that's being able to anticipate where running lanes are going to open up, and the ability, or not the ability, but the ability to see the cutback lanes. And this Chargers offensive line is actually quite good. I mean, after years of not being very good, they have invested draft capital in the offensive line. They went out and got Joe Alt, and it seems like that offensive line was actually blocking pretty well for J.K. Dobbins here.
Oh, look
And
great.
yeah, I mean, and the Chargers, they might be a bad team, but there are some bright spots there, and J.K. Dobbins, the run game could be one of them. I mean, Greg Roman just simply knows how to get running backs going. But Dave, the thing for me here is the Chargers actually didn't run a lot of plays. They ran 57 total plays, which was one of the lowest in week one, maybe even close to being the lowest. But out of the 29 routes run or dropbacks, excuse me, here for the Chargers, J.K. Dobbins ran a route on 17 of them, which more than doubled what Gus Edwards was doing. So it's that passing game usage for me. It's not just and I think a lot of people are going to look at the highlights. They're going to look at the big explosive plays that J.K. Dobbins had, but it's the 17 routes run. It's the 3 targets. It's the fact that he is getting work in that passing game, which is just so valuable because now if we get J.K. Dobbins in space, with the ability that he has to make people miss, that's where I think we're going to get some really, really valuable fantasy usage.
Yeah, I mean, there's few things I want more than a healthy JK Dobbins, especially behind this offensive line with this coaching staff. I mean, this is what I've been dreaming for since he was drafted. And I'm just praying that he can stay healthy and have himself a good year because when he is on and when he is just running well, one of the most exciting backs in the league. Like he can just truck through defenders. He's got the jump cuts that can just leave defenders flat on their back in the open field. Like he can really do it all. He is such a well-rounded running back that I'm rooting really, really hard for him. And the first thing I did when I saw him with his breakaway run yesterday was check every single league I was in. And unfortunately, he wasn't available in any. But if he
Womp
is, he's
womp.
a guy that you got to pick up.
Well, there you have it. 17 waiver wire ads for week 2 of fantasy football. This has been fun. We're going to be back again tomorrow doing our panic meter episode where we are just going to overreact to everything that happened in week 1, tell you how you guys should be reacting, what we're doing. And Dave, man, fantasy football season is upon us. It's crazy. We're going to be doing our daily shows Monday through
Mhm.
Thursday, letting you guys know who to start, who to sit, who to trade for. It's just going to be a great season here. I want to thank our audience for watching and listening all off season, and for watching and listening all the way through this episode here. For myself, for Dave, we'll see you next time. Adios.